Everyone, and welcome to another Brain Dojo broadcast. This episode is entitled Learning to Control Your Triggers. Now, what do I mean by triggers? Well, I see triggers as something that we all tend to have these, something that will trigger a response, trigger an emotion, trigger a physical response. Just something that makes us think, oh, it might be a fast, might be an aggressive or a violent or an emotional trigger, but it's something that kicks something off in our thought process, in our adrenaline response. It does something to us. It's a trigger for something. So hopefully you can understand what I mean by that. Do I need to explain that a little bit more? Let me see if I can give you an example. One of the triggers that I used to have, it doesn't happen anymore because my dear mother has passed away now some years ago. But I used to have this trigger with her where, and I'm sure she was only asking me this because she was interested in what I was doing in my life. But if I called her, whenever I called her, she would always say, "Where are you? What are you doing?" And I struggled with that. Because in my mind, it was like, why does she always need to know where I am and what I'm doing? I'm X number of years old now. That should have passed. Now, that, if you like, is a perfect example of a trigger because I'm pretty sure that she didn't mean to be nosy or to be intrusive or want to do anything other than be interested. And my poor mother, thinking back, I'm fighting with this trigger, and she wasn't even trying to trigger anything off. So I think that's a perfect example of a trigger that's just held by the person being triggered. It's not even something that's intentional by other people. So hopefully you can see what I mean by a trigger. I don't know if you're a film person, you're into films, but the Back to the Future films, Marty, he has the trigger over here. If anyone calls him chicken, what are you, chicken? And if anyone says that to him, that's his trigger. He has to respond in a certain way to prove he's not chicken. So hopefully those are a couple of examples that you have. Some are humorous, some are not. Some are light-hearted in our lives, and some are more serious. But the purpose of this broadcast is to help you to learn to control your triggers so that you have more of a choice about how you respond rather than it being automatic and uncontrolled. And as always, the very first thing that we need to do is accept that we have an uncontrolled, involuntary response to these triggers. So I suppose let's go back a step from that. So not the first thing, but the second thing would be that. So the first thing would be recognize your triggers. Work out what it is that fires your buttons, presses your buttons, gets you going, or whatever. Now, you may have some positive triggers that have a really brilliant response. This happens and you do this, which is fantastic. Don't do anything about those. Those are great. Keep those, and enjoy them. Positive triggers are brilliant, aren't they? Positive triggers. Some small child says something kind to you, and you go, "Oh, that's lovely." I feel really nice about that. Good, positive trigger, fantastic. Keep it. Don't do anything about it. But the others, the ones that you think, actually I could do without those, or I could do with controlling those a bit better. All right. So first thing, recognize the triggers. Go through your life and think about which things tend to happen and tend to put you into either an uncomfortable state or an unkind state or an unresourceful state or a sad state. Anything that triggers a response within you that you don't enjoy, then look at these things, make a note of them, and think, all right, let's work our way through these, and let's see how we can work on having a different response uh, to each of these. If you can understand why, if there's a reason why something triggers you off, then that's a good starting point. So, for instance, going back to my triggers with my mother about her saying to me, "Where are you? What are you doing?" Well, that stems back to me being a teenager, where I always got the impression that she was trying to control what I did as a teenager. I'm sure she was trying to control what I did as a teenager. That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? So, yeah, so that makes perfect sense. Now, if you can understand why these things trigger you, that's the first step towards doing something about it. Obviously, there are so many things. There are so many things that could be, so many reasons why you could be triggered, that it's hard for me to cover them in this short broadcast. But all I can say to you is, once you understand what the reasoning is behind it, then you can look at those things and say, do I have a choice about how I respond? And of course, you always do have a choice. We all have a choice about how we respond. If again, using my example, I can look at what my mother says, and I can choose. As I got older, I chose to think, oh, poor old girl, she's just interested in what I'm doing. I'll tell her where I am and what I'm doing, and I'll do it with a bit of humour, and I'll pull her leg about being nosy and whatever, but in a nice way. I don't want to make her feel like we've fallen out or anything. And that was a very simple way to deal with the trigger, and it helped me to do that because I understood why it was happening, why it was triggering this response in me. And if you can look back and see in your life why do you respond like this? Why is this an automatic response? And the thing with Marty in Back to the Future, why did he respond that way to being called a chicken? Well, maybe I'd say maybe it made him feel a certain way. But of course, we all know, don't we? Nothing makes you feel a certain way. Something happens and we choose how to feel about it. But unless we've had this explained to us as well about we can choose our responses and our reactions, then we don't know that we can choose. And we just immediately jump to this triggered response. All right, so if you can work out why, great. But even if you can't work out why, you can still take some action. You can still say, all right, when this happens, I choose to respond in this way. I choose to have these thoughts. I choose to say to myself, this, this, and this. Let's see if I can use the Marty from Back to the Future example. So let's say somebody called me a chicken. And my response previously would have been, well, I'll show you, I'm not a chicken. I'll do this thing that you say I'm afraid of doing. And then get myself into trouble, obviously. All right, so I could look at that situation and say to myself, right, if someone calls me a chicken, what are the things that I know? Well, I can be fairly sure that they are trying to get a response from me. They are trying to exert some control over me. They're trying to manipulate me in some way. All right, good. All right. Now, do I want to give in to that? Do I want to make them successful? Do I want to say, yeah, well done. You've completely controlled me. My trigger has been fired. My trigger has been pulled. And I am now in the state that you thought I would be in before you said what you said or did what you did. All right, so that's a great start. You need to think to yourself, all right, is that a response I would choose? Is that the response I would prefer? Secondly, you need to understand that the response you prefer is available to you. If you would prefer to be calm, to go, oh, silly old you, you know, that's not going to have any effect on me anymore. I realise what you're doing. I see that, and I see the funny side of that, but it's not going to work today. All right? So that's a good response that you could have, if that's what you choose. And I'm going through all these examples. You may like your own response. You may love your trigger. And as I said earlier, if your trigger works for you, don't worry about it. Stick with it. I'm just trying to avoid you being triggered into things that you don't like. So prepare. Decide in advance how you would like to respond. You chicken. All right, so then the cogs start whirring in here, don't they? All right, now when I was deciding how I'd like to deal with this, I would think this: they're trying to wind me up, they're trying to get me going, they're trying to make me unhappy for the day. I prefer to have none of those things, so my response will be, oh yeah. I remember when I used to respond to that, I used to get really uptight when someone called me a chicken. Thank goodness I've moved on. Anyway, what should we do? Decide in advance. Have something all worked out so that you feel prepared. Feeling prepared in life is very, very rarely a bad thing. Having something up your sleeve, something in the bag, something that's one you made earlier. It's a great idea. It saves you so much heartache, so much hassle. And I think that this deciding in advance is the most important aspect to dealing with your triggers. Now, did this person trigger you on purpose, or was it a complete accident? And I'm revealing lots about myself here. But another one of my triggers is large, strong men being unkind to smaller, petite women. Now, please don't do the whole PC thing on me. I'm sure, my wife being one of them, I'm sure there are many, many women who can look after themselves, and that's not a problem at all. And it extends. It's not just men and women. It's large people, large, strong people, being unkind to smaller, weaker people. But with the domestic violence thing, it often manifests as a male and female relationship. Male being unkind to male. And you can argue with me as much as you like, but crime statistics prove that that's a much more likely thing. Anyway, let's leave all those statistics and whatever for another time. I was looking at the difference between an intentional trigger and an accidental trigger. So in that situation, an intentional trigger might be if somebody knew me and knew that was one of my triggers, they may be intentionally unkind to their partner when they're around me to try and get a response. So, intentional trigger, I have to think how I'm going to deal with something that's intentional, how I want to cope with it. Or the alternative to that is an unintentional trigger. They had no idea that's one of my triggers. They had no concept of it. It just happened to occur when I was around, and I can feel it on the inside starting to trigger me. So what do I do? What is my response? What do I prefer to have as my response? And with the domestic violence thing, I know that I have to speak up. I have to say something. I have to get involved, because I feel that that's something I ought to do. But I also have to do that in a very controlled way. I have to be measured. I have to think about what I'm going to do. Because if it just makes me see red, if I don't control it and I see red, then everything's out of control, and that's not good. That's probably not going to end up a happy situation for anybody, me included. So I think to myself, right, when this happens, if this happens, this is how I will respond. And I have a calculated response, something I've decided in advance that I will do. and I don't have to try and make this decision in a stressful situation. It's already made for me, and we'll move on. This is the process that we'll take. This is how I'll try and deal with it, and mostly that works. So the next point is, if somebody is trying to trigger you, or somebody is triggering you, you can empathize, you can sympathize with them, but try not to criticize them for it. Because if you criticize them for it, even if you do it mentally, you're not actually saying any words, you're just, and you get into this criticism thing, that's going to trigger you further. That's going to push you further down into the rabbit hole. So have some empathy, to think, even if you don't say it out loud again. I'm not interested really in this broadcast. I'm not dealing with how you deal with the relationship between you and the person that's triggered you. I'm more interested in you dealing with the fact that you've been triggered. So in your mind, is there any way you can empathize? Is there any way you can think to yourself, okay, they're doing this because that's the way they've been programmed by their previous life experiences. They're not doing it intentionally. They're not trying to. Is there any way that you can get through it with empathy? If empathy doesn't work, try sympathy. Empathy or sympathy. Empathy or sympathy. They will both possibly help you to stay calm and help you to not be triggered as much as you would have been otherwise. Sympathy. They may have had some really tough times. Someone may have been horrible to them. Someone who looks just like me may have said or done something to them, or someone of similar size, or someone in this situation, or a situation similar to this. Think about all those things. Do your best not to criticize, even if it's only in your own head. Because if you say things even to yourself, like, God, they shouldn't have done that. That was a horrible thing to do. That really winds me up. Whether you verbalize those things or not, it's still winding you up. It's still getting you into a state. And the whole purpose of this is for you to not get your triggers fired off. All right, so do those things: empathy, sympathy. Try to avoid criticism. All right, because whether you say it out loud or you say it in your head or you have this conversation with yourself, being critical very rarely calms you down. And decide on your preferred outcome. Now, this is really important. What I say about making decisions in advance, how you'll respond and whatever. Of course, all of those things I would hope would lead to my desired outcome. And my desired outcome is that the situation occurred, whatever it was. I stayed calm. I didn't get myself into a state. Nothing was triggered. Maybe I said or did something and got involved. Maybe not. If it wasn't necessary, then I wouldn't have been got involved. But maybe it was necessary. Maybe I said or did something that calmed or changed the situation, and everything eased off, and we're all back to a calm situation. Now, I understand that a preferred outcome may not happen, but at least if I know what the preferred outcome is, I can aim for that. I can say to myself, right, this is what we're after. We want everyone to walk away from this feeling calm, peaceful, as though it was dealt with easily and no one got too stressed about it. Yes, does that make sense? Good. All right, and the last thing, practice. Practice. If you're triggered often, practice how you're going to deal with being triggered. And then when you've done that lots and it's working, then maybe practice not being triggered. That's an even better step. Yeah, but seriously, practice. You could, if you know someone, if you've got a family member who knows what your triggers are and they're happy to work with you on it, get them to role play with you. Get them to go through things, and you can have some real fun with this. It's a real opportunity to test each other and help each other grow. And if you, as I said, if you've got a family member who can work with you on this, then maybe they have a trigger as well that you could help them with. And it's brilliant. It's a really good way to work. Um, I don't know if you've ever heard this expression. You may think, this is really random. It doesn't really fit with what we're saying. But this expression sits well with me, and I get it. And the expression is, most people spend more time planning a 2-week holiday than they do planning their life. Yeah, so you think about that. You'll spend, maybe you're one of those people. You'll spend ages planning your holiday because you want that 2 weeks or 1 week, whatever it is, 10 days. You want it to be a lovely time. You think, yes, I really want that to be a good investment. I want it to be relaxing, calm, enjoyable, exciting. Wherever it is you want it to be, you plan for that thing to be like that. How many of us plan anything in our lives? You spend your whole life in your life. You only spend 2 weeks a year on holiday, or maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, but you only spend a short period relatively on holiday. But we plan that holiday so well. Plan your life. This is all part of the life plan to make your life run smoothly and make it as enjoyable as it can be. All right. So hopefully I've made my point. Hopefully you see where I come from, and hopefully I've made some interesting and helpful points to you. All right. If you have any comments, please let me have them. info@braindojo.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.